The day that some of you thought would never come is finally upon us. I am wearing the last of my already hand-knitted garments, and we all know what that means. It means that if I don't get some of my whips under control, next podcast, it's going to be interesting. Hello Pickles, and welcome to episode 21 of the Knitting Vicariously podcast. My name is Caroline. I'm found more commonly across Instagram and Ravelry as dunderknit. I am a knitter living in London, and if this is your first time joining us here on the podcast, a huge hello and welcome to you. I hope you're all well. As you may well be aware, but just as a quick reminder, the language on this podcast is a little bit sweary, and therefore if swearing is not your bag, I appreciate you joining us. This probably isn't going to be the podcast for you, but if you've been around for a long old while now, whether you like it, whether you loathe it, whether you simply tolerate it, I am delighted to have you all back, and I really hope you're all well. It's hard to believe, but we are already heading into May this year, and that means a third of the year has already gone. It has passed us by entirely, and I, for one, do not have enough knitting to show for it. I did manage to get, obviously, one FO out last week. I've got my sweater finished. I've got another sweater, maybe two, that are edging closer that I'll talk about a little bit later on, but yeah, I do not have enough to show for this year. By this time last year I was flying. I had 4 sweaters, maybe even 5 off the needles. I had gifts that I'd knit. I was underway, and this year is slower, but it's fine because it's all about knitting vicariously, and that I have been doing in spades, which is a very good thing indeed. As ever, a massive thank you to everyone who watched, who commented on the last few videos. Last podcast I touched on some of the things I purchased at EYF, which very much rounded out, finally, my EYF footage from this year. So thank you all very, very much for your lovely comments over there. Similarly, we have now finished our Vicarious EYF giveaway. We had almost 1,000 posts in that thread, which is batshit crazy, and I'm really, really delighted that so many of you entered and were so kind and kind of forthcoming with your ideas about what your ideal yarny fueled day would be. A lot of them involved Edinburgh, a good few of them involved Shetland, and I can wholeheartedly understand that, but for the most part every single one that I read, and I have read all of them, it did involve yarn, and most of them also involved a good bit of time spent knitting. Some involved podcasts, some involved sitting down with friends. There were those of you that weren't super keen on crowds and so just wanted time spent on your own, which I can appreciate, but also those of you who wanted to go hell for leather, whether it be shopping yarn festivals or local yarn stores, and I identify with pretty much all of the ones that were in there, so thank you again so much for your entries. I used random number generator to choose a post at random from all of those that were entered in there, and the post that it came back with was post number 605, and that is from MttCavin, or MttCavin based on your username. I'm gonna guess it's Matt, but Matt is based over in the US, and his post was about spending time with his wonderfully supportive husband, who is incredibly good at helping to support and gently encourage Matt's indulgence in his yarn habit and knitting habits of choice. And so I'm so delighted that we get to share not only the EYF goodies with you, but also with your wonderful husband as well. So Matt, if you could please drop me a note with your full name and address, I will get that sent over to you. The easiest way to contact me will be on Ravelry. I do have a lot of messages in there that I haven't looked at yet, and I'm very sorry if you have messaged me and I haven't got back to you. So Matt, if you could please put in there yarn giveaway winner, I will prioritize that. I will get to the others later, I promise you, and we will go from there. But yes, congratulations, and thank you again to everybody who entered. It was a delight going through your messages as well. This week we're very much back to a regular run-of-the-mill episode. I haven't attended any new festivals. I haven't really got much in the way of stash acquisitions to show you, although I do have a couple of very special skeins to share. I haven't attended any events, so there's not much to talk around there, but I do have a little bit of progress on some of my whips, and so I'll be taking you through those. But before we get to any of that, as ever, you will find show notes for this week's episode both in the description box below that you can find by clicking on the little down arrow just immediately below this video over on YouTube. You can also find the show notes on Ravelry. We have a Ravelry podcast group, and that is the Knitting Vicariously podcast group, which you can find by searching for Knitting Vicariously in the groups tab on the Ravelry site. There we have a myriad of threads, including but not limited to posts around or threads around sharing your actual knitting as well as your vicarious knitting. Our wonderful moderator Yelena opened that up this week, so that, or rather in the last couple of weeks, so that we can see more of what you are actually knitting on. Now, that is fodder for vicarious knitting because I can take part vicariously in what you're knitting, and so it's all very much a virtuous cycle, which I am entirely on board with. We also have our monthly Show Us Your Vicarious Knits thread, which just means that you can go in and show off any patterns, any yarn combinations that have caught your eye. We'll continue to do those on a monthly basis, and then also there will be a thread for each individual podcast episode that goes live with the show notes. You can also find show notes over on Instagram. So in addition to my personal Instagram account, I also have the Knitting Vicariously Instagram account, which is where I post individual updates for each episode that include hashtags and makers with their Instagram handles relevant to the episode. But without any further ado, I'm going to jump into the podcast episode proper. And so regular viewers will know that the first thing on the agenda is to talk a little bit about what it is that I'm wearing. And as I referenced right up front in this week's video, I'm on to the last of my pre-existing knit garments. And this sounds a little bit harsh, and I don't mean it to, but I was almost hoping I wouldn't have to show you this one. Not because I don't love... love is a strong word. Not because I don't think the pattern is excellent. Not because I don't think I actually knitted it and executed it to a fairly high standard. But mostly just because this is one of the very, very few garments that I own that I rarely wear, to the point where I wore this once for its original intention, and ever since then it's been in a wardrobe hanging up, and I've never worn it again. And the reasons for that may become clear. But before I get too sort of heavy-handed or down on this at all, let me tell you what it is. This sweater here is the Criollo pronunciation is not my strong point, but it is the Criollo sweater by Justina Larkowska, who is Letta's Knits. I will put a picture of it over here on the screen for you to see it. It is a lovely little cardigan. It has buttons the whole way down the front, as cardigans are generally wont to do. It's quite fitted. It has a fair bit of negative ease. The sleeve lengths, you've got a few different ones to choose from. I went for the shorter sleeve length, and yeah, it's fine. It's fine. The biggest issue I have with this is not my style at all. At all. I knit this to wear over a very pretty dress to go to a wedding of a couple of friends of mine a number of years ago, and it went beautifully with the dress. It was a lovely thing to wear to a wedding. I don't generally wear things that I wear to weddings every other day of the week. I'm not a particularly kind of cropped sweaters, flared skirts girl. I think there are some people out there, and I have a few very good friends in mind, who can pull this off beautifully, and I'm in such admiration of their style. It's not really my bag. I am more of a jeans, boots, slobby t-shirts, big cozy jumpers, maybe a sort of slightly fitted jumper, but certainly not one that is kind of negative ease, short sleeves, cropped, those kinds of things. But before I get too hard or too down on it, let me do a little traditional kind of show off so you can see the cardigan itself in its entirety. Okay, so here we have it. This is Criollo. I mean, who knows? Who knows? But this is the cardigan by Justyna Larkowska. It is, as I mentioned, a little cropped cardigan. It has shorter sleeves that are not quite short sleeves, but certainly fairly short and well above my elbows. It is a gorgeous pattern, and if I come a little bit closer and go up on my tiptoes, you will be able to see that there is this texture the whole way across the hem of the cardigan. It's on the hem of the sleeves as well, and a little bit around the collar as well. It is knit at a very fine gauge, so this is fingering weight yarn, and if I stand sort of side on, you can see it goes the whole way around the back. You can see in terms of my styling choices, very much of the jeans and top and tiny cropped cardigan. You'll probably be able to tell this is not really my my standard wardrobe choice for a weekend afternoon, but yeah, I didn't really want to go whole hog and wear a dress just for the purposes of having this on. That felt perhaps a little bit overkill, but yeah, it is a really lovely pattern, and I'm being a massive downer on it, and I think it is genuinely just because I feel slightly uncomfortable wearing this on the podcast. It's not very me. But in terms of the pattern review, let me try and do it justice, and let me try and get away from the fact that basically I'm just standing here gesturing at my boobs on the podcast. So one thing I did want to mention, and excuse the slightly squidgy floorboards, there is a little bit of short row shaping here in at the bust itself. In terms of the construction of the cardigan, it's really clever. So it is a really interesting construction. The sleeves are worked partly in a contiguous method, which is the first time I'd done a sort of true contiguous sleeve. I won't go into too much detail around how that works. One, because I can't remember it very accurately, and two, because I don't want to give away the game of the pattern itself. But really cleverly worked up. And then, as you can see, there's these little pearlescent buttons all the way down the front. Again, faffing around with buttons is not really my style, both in terms of wearing a closed cardigan and in terms of actually faffing around and having to sew all of these buttons on. But sew them on I did, and committed to it. And you know, again, as a garment, in terms of how it's executed, it is pretty good, and I'm happy with that. It's just not something I wear very often at all. So I'm sure there are plenty of you out there saying, do you know what, it's fine, it looks really nice, it's lovely, and I'm not doubting you for a second. As I say, it's a great pattern. I really enjoyed knitting it. It's just not very me. But let me sit down, stop doing this, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it. So I think you can probably tell on the basis of my awkwardness that I'm not feeling at my most comfortable right now. And do you know what? It's really difficult because, as I say, this is a lovely pattern. In terms of some of the finished object pictures, in terms of what it looks like on different shapes, on different sizes, it's a really great pattern. Justyna Larkowska, she knits some beautiful things, she designs some beautiful things. I think it's more just to do with my own personal aesthetic and what I feel comfortable in, that this is just not something that I would gravitate towards, pull out, sit and talk to a camera in an otherwise empty room, although the cat is asleep in the corner right now. But it just feels a little bit unnatural for me. Part of that is down to the cropped nature of the cardigan itself. Having something that finishes quite short. I knit most of my sweaters to be kind of mid-hip length. It is my length of choice. This is obviously a lot shorter. It sits kind of very high hip, potentially even sort of low natural waist. And so the length is a little bit different for me. The negative ease is quite different for me. I tend to knit things that are either with 0 ease or with a little bit of positive ease, and again, having something that is quite very fitted actually in terms of the sizing and so on. I knit the size 40 to 42. My bust size at the moment is somewhere around sort of 45, 46-ish, no, 44, 45-ish, and therefore it's definitely quite a bit of negative ease. It's quite a bit of negative ease around the stomach region and around sort of my sides here, which are areas of my body I'm a little bit more sensitive about. But yeah, it's just it's fitted in all of the places that I'm just a little bit uncomfortable with it being quite that fitted. But at the same time, it's a perfectly lovely cardigan. So enough of my kind of own body insecurities to be waxing lyrical about. And again, I say this right up front. This is not me fishing for compliments about me and my body and the way that I look. I'm for the most part actually kind of okay with it. So you know, I appreciate any thoughts you may have. Please don't feel the need to share those at all. But at the same time, it's more just I'm very conscious of some people who've talked about the fact that obviously I am I think I do actually fall into the plus size category on the basis of the fact that I am somewhere between a UK 14 and 16. So in some stores I've been known to be significantly higher than that, and I'm looking at you, H&M. Fuck off with your size 22 jeans. That's all I'm saying. But yeah, I would say that in terms of my body measurements, I vary widely between like a size 14 in some places and a size 18 to 20 in other places. And I've had a number of people who've said to me in comments privately or elsewhere, kind of, it's really nice to see someone that has a body shape that is more similar to mine, so I can see how some of the designs look on different shapes and sizes. And obviously everybody has a body shape that can be clothed in some way or another. I think it's fair to say that some people have a slightly easier time of it than others finding clothes that or designs that fit with minimal modifications. This one fit with minimal modifications. I can absolutely attest to its just, you know, brilliance in terms of how well it is written. It is entirely down to the fact that the style of it, the way that it fits me, is just something I'm less comfortable with than some other ones out there. So again, this is not really a piece around body positivity or me fishing for compliments. This is simply a piece around the style of this sweater being a little bit different from my norm and me not being totally on board with it. But you know, it's fine. There are some details about the sweater that I really like. I think the fact that there is this kind of patterning here on the sleeves, that it's mirrored on the hem and on the collar of the cardigan, I really enjoy. Let me move it here so you can see. I do quite like the sort of scooped neckness of the cardigan itself, again in terms of sort of patterns that I would more regularly wear. It would come sort of slightly higher up, closer to my collarbone here at the front, but this is quite a nice departure in that sense. I really like things like the button band here at the front is finished with an I-cord edging, which is a beautiful finishing detail. It makes it look really polished at the front. And similarly, I'm kind of impressed with my button sewing on techniques. As I say, I don't wear many cardigans. I certainly don't wear very many cardigans closed, but this one seems to fit pretty well. There's no kind of massive like gaping that you might sometimes see at the front. So yeah, I'm pretty happy in terms of the execution level of the pattern and the project itself. The yarn I should touch on too. This is one of the few garments that I have actually made with my stash of Wollmeise. So this is Wollmeise Pure, which is their 100% merino base in the Magnolia colorway, or Magnolia in translation terms. And I believe it's Magnolia Mittel, which is the middle intensity. In other words, there's a light to dark in the middle, and this is the middle. Anyone who's used the Wollmeise bases before knows that there is a huge amount of yardage that you get per skein. So actually, rather helpfully, I'm sitting right in front of my Wollmeise stash at the moment. It's in this middle cubby here, but for any uninitiated folks out there, this is Wollmeise. This is also the pure 100% base. This is in the Mince colorway, which is the mint, which is rather more intense of a mint green than some that I've seen, hence why I think it should still be okay for me. But yeah, it comes in these very kind of overweight, quite sturdy, quite sturdy skeins, and I know people have sort of mixed opinions and feelings about how sturdy these skeins are. It's definitely a very tightly plied yarn. I mean, tightly skeined too, but tightly plied, and so I've heard some people who've kind of fed back that it feels like it's knitting up like cotton. It's certainly a very sturdy base. Now, the good thing about that is that it wears really well. Obviously, I could give a better view on that if this was a cardigan or a project that I wore particularly frequently. But I will say, so the day that I wore this out, I wore it to a wedding. I had a bag with me. There's absolutely no sign of having carried the bag on this shoulder. I had a little belt underneath that I felt was kind of had the potential to catch a little bit on the underside of the hem of this. That shows no sign of it at all. Certainly all of the signs that I've seen from this project and other projects where I've knit with Wollmeise in the past suggest it does wear incredibly well. So for all that it is a very sturdy yarn when it comes to knitting with it, it does produce some pretty good results in the medium to long term. It is quite a fine weight yarn. It is a fingering weight, but it was knit up at a fairly decent gauge in all honesty. So I used, I think, a 3 and a 3.5mm needles, which are the recommended needle sizes, for a gauge of about 26 stitches over 4 inches. And I will say it's given a really nice fabric. It certainly doesn't feel too kind of stiff. It's got a huge amount of kind of movement to it. It's got some good stretch to it as well. So even though this does have negative ease, I don't sort of feel as though you can see through it, which you might risk if it had been knit at a slightly looser gauge. So I think 26 stitches per inch works really, really nicely for this project and for this yarn as well. So yeah, so for all that I may not feel entirely comfortable in it, it is a great, great pattern. And if you are looking for cardigans to fit, whether they be cropped, whether you knit them slightly longer, whether you have longer sleeves, shorter sleeves, essentially this is a great pattern. So please don't let my slight unwillingness to wear it before now, or my reticence in talking about it, please don't let that put a dampener on you if this is something that you can see yourself knitting in the future. I do really, really like it. It's just not something that I would normally gravitate to in my wardrobe. But yes, so as I mentioned, this is the last of the pre-existing garments that I've already got knit. So that means I have shown off all, let me think, is it 20? No, 19 because I wore one sweater. I wore my stalactite sweater on both episode 3 and 4. Because I filmed those back to back. So 19 sweaters that I've shown off. I'm hopeful that I will have another one finished for the next podcast, so fingers crossed and all that. And obviously even more hopeful that I have another one for after that. But we shall see. There's another couple of sweaters that I've knit in the past that have since been gifted. There's a few more that are consigned either to the frog pile or have already been frogged. And so I obviously won't be able to show those on here. But yeah, all the more incentive to start ploughing through a few things. And what I will say though as well is that it is coming up to summer, so I might have to think about filling this section of the podcast in other more inventive ways. But we shall see how we get on. But as it is, let's move into a little bit more actual knitting. And as I mentioned, there are no FOs this week, but I do have the first work in progress to share with you. It is in my little grey girl bag with the psychedelic squirrels. This is one of my favourites. I talk about Gemma on a very, very frequent basis, but I love this psychedelic squirrel bag. Gemma was up in Edinburgh for EYF last month and had some fabulous new fabrics and bags. One of her bags is also going to be going to Matt as part of the EYF giveaway, and so yes, I hope you enjoy. But living in here is a project that you have seen for the last few weeks now. This is my Scottie sweater. I will put the picture of it up here on the screen. It is a pattern by MttCavin, and it is a fabulous pattern that has all of this duplicate stitch kind of faux plaid, I think you Americans call it, tartan as we would call it over here, or sort of check as we would call it here. But yes, I won't be duplicate stitching the details on. I just really like the shape of this sweater, the gauge that it was knit at. It fit perfectly with what I wanted to work up at the time. And what I wanted to work up at the time was this. So here it is. I am, I would say, a good 2/3 of the way through my first sleeve, but the body itself, the hem, is now complete. You can see my little progress keeper on here showing where I was last time round. This is a fabulous little progress keeper. Oops, see if it'll focus. So this little progress keeper here is my little Starbucks cup from Hannah, who is the corner of craft. She is a delightful human being. If you have seen our previous episode, I think it's episode 18, 19, Unraveling, that is the episode where Hannah and I take on Unravel Festival. But I have my little progress keeper from her there keeping me company. But yes, so I am, I would say, a good 2/3 of the way through this sleeve. It is working up pretty quickly. I've done a couple of decreases. The pattern doesn't have any decreases built in. It is very much a straight sleeve the whole way down. I've been adding in a couple of decreases, honestly, pretty much as and when. I did have a rhythm that I was going to get into with them. I was going to kind of decrease every 8 rows, and I did a little bit of that, and then I forgot that I'd done that, and then I knit a good 20 rows without any decreases, and then I remembered, and then I went, oh fuck, I should probably add in some extra decreases, and then I did, and now we are where we are. So as long as I am absent-minded enough to check this sleeve and duplicate that on the other sleeve, will be fine. I mean, absolutely worst case, I'm going to have an extra couple of stitches in one sleeve versus the other. No one will ever know. But yeah, I'm really not that particular. But also this is still a pretty wide sleeve, so given this is going to be around about sort of here, I guess, on my sleeve, you can see that in terms of like fit, we're going to be fine. I will take it in and kind of cinch it around the cuff. I quite like the idea of having sort of slightly blousey sleeves and then a slightly cinched in cuff around my wrist here, so that's my intention with this. But yeah, I reckon another few hours of knitting on this and I will have the first sleeve done. The second sleeve will not take too long at all. So in terms of the construction of this sweater, it is knit with set-in sleeves. So as you can see, if I hold up the other side, I just have a big old armhole right now. So when it comes to this sleeve here, I've got the seam that you can see at the top. What I will do is I will add in my new ball of yarn down here at the bottom of the sleeve. I will then pick up stitches and knit them the whole way round. I will then go up and place a stitch marker roughly where the hem is here along the top, which will be halfway around my set of stitches, and then I'll start working in some short row sleeve shaping. And what that does is I will knit past a few stitches on this side, wrap and turn to the equivalent on the other side, wrap and turn, and then just keep going one extra stitch the whole way round until I am almost down here at the bottom of the underarm. And what that does is it gives you a sleeve cap that looks a bit like this, which is incredibly hard to see in 2 dimensions, but you might be just about able to tell that kind of here at the top is where I started, or where the stitch marker was, and then from about here I then started working it back and forth the whole way around. So yeah, you end up with a little bit of a kind of a faux seam, if you want to call it that. So if I hold it up, you'll be able to see that there is a little bit of a kind of a sort of faux seam effect around the edge of the sleeve itself, but really nothing that makes it look particularly obvious. And it's an effect that I really like. It fits really well. It fits like a very kind of standard jumper seam would. You don't have the thing with raglans, raglans do annoy me ever so slightly, because what you get occasionally with raglans is just a little bit of extra fabric that gathers in here at the front, and so you don't get that at all with a set-in sleeve. It fits really quite naturally. But yeah, they're also pretty easy to do. So hopefully I will bash this one out fairly quickly. I do have, as I've talked about on the bottom here, I do have on the ribbing at the bottom of the sweater, I bound off using my very, very favourite Laurie's Twisty Bind Off. I have talked about this now for a few weeks consecutively, but let me hold it up so you can see it. So Laurie's Twisty Bind Off, as I've mentioned on the last couple of podcasts, is my favourite bind off for ribbing. It is worked slightly differently. I will put a link in the description box and the show notes below, but it does give you a really nicely finished, very, very stretchy bind off. And so yeah, definitely recommend that one. So yeah, progress with this is ongoing, and I hope to be wearing this next podcast. We'll see. We'll see. If it's suddenly like 25 degrees again, like it was last weekend, which was bullshit, by the way, I'm all in favour of, you know, kind of temperate bank holidays, sunshine, all those good things. It was Easter here last weekend in the UK. That means that we have Friday and Monday off as a 4-day bank holiday weekend. And it got to be 25, 27 degrees, which is like high 70s-ish, which, yeah, I call bullshit on that in April. That is not what I signed up for at all. I was very grumpy. But yeah, so as long as it's not that again, I'm going to be wearing this. There, gauntlet thrown, down, tossed thing. Challenge accepted. Let's go with that. As I've mentioned in previous weeks, I am knitting this out of Drops Air. Drops is a yarn, or rather Drops Air is a yarn that is made by Garn Studio. I've talked about them in previous weeks. They're not necessarily a company that I would recommend. I have a few issues with some of their practices with regards to intellectual property and a few patterns that they've released that are incredibly similar to those of some independent designers. I do appreciate, and I know there is a discussion ongoing at the moment around pattern prices and affordability of those, and I appreciate that some people are using Drops patterns on the basis that they can't afford to support some independent designers. Again, I make no aspersions, no judgments about what you choose to do and where you choose to spend your money or not spend your money. All I'm saying is that for me personally, I don't really agree with the principles of a company who choose to essentially release patterns that are incredibly similar to those released by independent designers. My personal beliefs. But in terms of the yarn itself, as I mentioned, it is Drops Air. I've had it for a very long time. This is the ball band. So you can see it. It is a blend of baby alpaca, merino, and a little bit of polyamide in there as well. It can be superwashed, or it can be machine washed rather, and it is this kind of blown yarn. So in terms of the texture, you have this core and then the fibres are kind of blown through it. And it is in this blue colourway, and the colourway name is indeed blue. As I've talked about in the past as well, I knit my sleeves on smaller circumference circular needles. These are, I believe, these are either 12 or 16-inch circulars. They are higher sharps, and it is a size 5mm, so it's a US size 8, and it just means that I can whiz around pretty swiftly. I will end up switching out to a slightly smaller circumference just to do the ribbing, and I will go down to a 4.5mm size needle for that one, which is a US size 7. So there we go, that is the progress on my Scottie sweater. Hopefully a little bit more to show you next time. Now, I have a sneaking suspicion that when I spoke to you last time, I also hoped that I would be a little bit further along with my Scottie sweater. And in fairness, I probably would have been, had I not done a me and got distracted. Distracted I very much was. Yeah, sorry not sorry. But it does mean that I have another whip to show you, so yay, more content. Let's look on the bright side, shall we? This is living in a bag that I was very, very kindly gifted. I've shown this on the podcast a couple of times before, but my old knit group, who are based up in Buckinghamshire, Margaret, who is wonderful, gifted me this fabulous project bag just before I went off to Rhinebeck last year. She is not currently on Etsy. We're hoping to get her on there eventually. It's a fabulous little bag. It is sort of squishy and well interfaced, and it has the most adorable pom-pom on the end of it here. So thank you, Margaret. It is still one of my favourite bags. But in here is a new cast on. No. Last episode I was showing off my Zweig pullover by Caitlin Hunter, who is Boyland Knitworks, and I was talking about the fact that I'd really enjoyed working on it. It was a little bit sloggy towards the end, just in terms of the little cables and the texture on the body itself, but I was thinking about how much actually I'd really enjoyed working on the lace yoke section, and in particular it got me to think about what were the sorts of patterns of sweaters, of designs that I really enjoyed not only working on but actually wearing, because the garments that are the most wearable for me, current company very much excluded, they tend to be sweaters that have kind of interest around the neckline. Specifically, the sweater that I wear more than any other is my Siri pullover. I've worn that in the past. It's in a bright, super obnoxious color, coral colorway. I know I want to knit another one in grey because one, grey, and two, not obnoxious coral. Very much appropriate for other instances. But it's also just that I really love the pattern. It fits me really well. I've made it ever so slightly more A-line than it is in the original pattern, just by adding an extra couple of decreases. It means it looks really great with just black trousers or with jeans, which I wear both of to work. So it's just a very versatile sweater. And then I thought, well, actually my Zweig is kind of similar in the sense that it's got this kind of textured piece around the yoke itself. It feels more office appropriate than pure colour work. Colour work, I don't know, it feels a little bit more casual, whereas the Siri, because it's texture rather than colour work, in my head, that makes it more office appropriate. Who can say? But, so I was having a think of, okay, alright, I really like those two, so what else is there out there that's got a kind of textured yoke to it? And I looked and I trolled through Ravelry, and I do mean trolled, and I went through pattern after pattern after pattern, and then just thought, oh, I'm not really feeling it. Do you know I certainly get this, and other Vicarious knitters out there may know what I'm talking about. So when you finish knitting something and you've kind of reached a point with it where it's what you really want again. You may have gone through a cycle with it. I often do, which is, I really want this thing. I'm going to spend all my time knitting on this thing. Oh, shiny thing. And then that gets put off to one side and you forget about it, in the case of my Zweig, for about a year. And then you come back to it and all of a sudden it's like, no, actually, this thing is the thing I want. I'm going to get to the end of it. And I get to the end of it and I go, ah, that was great. What am I doing now? Huh? Oh, I really quite enjoyed working on that. And that's how I end up starting to knit two of things and the second one never gets finished because me. But with all of this is a very long-winded way of saying, I got to the end of my Zweig. I looked around. I was trying to find something similar. I couldn't find something similar. I am not knitting another Zweig. Before you jump to that conclusion, haha, no. I am knitting another Caitlin Hunter pattern. I am knitting White Horse by Caitlin Hunter. Oh, I know. And I know how many comments I get when, you know, people talk about, oh, we see you knitting things that aren't necessarily what every other person is knitting at the moment. And then I go and knit another Caitlin Hunter back to back. But, you know, sometimes the heart wants what it wants. And so let me hold this up. It's going to be a little bit hard to see because it is in grey, but this is White Horse by Caitlin Hunter. I tell you what, let me make it slightly easier for a second. Let me put the original picture up here on the screen so you can see what I'm talking about. Now, I did need to make a little bit of a sort of leap of imagination or kind of modification in my head before I recognised that this was the exact sweater that I wanted. What I would say with this is it did risk looking a little bit atypical for me in terms of its kind of styling. A lot of people that I've seen wearing it, they wear it over dresses, they wear it over skirts, and again, as we've established, not really my style of choice. Again, not knocking it, looks beautiful on everybody else that I've ever seen doing it, just doesn't feel right for me. And so when I started looking at this and thinking, is this really what I want to work on? What I started thinking about was, okay, I think what I want is something that sits a little bit higher up at the neck. They do all sit rather high at the neck anyway, but actually the cirri that I have is a folded neckband, and it sits kind of right up here, almost at the bottom of my throat. So I really like that style and fit. So I thought I want to lengthen the neckband a little bit. I want to make the sleeves more tapered. A lot of the sleeves that I've seen are quite blousy, which is going to work really nicely for my Scottie sweater. Not what I wanted for this, something a bit more tapered. And then again, there's a sort of slight blousiness sometimes to the body of this sweater, but again, if I just pull it flat, if I don't kind of cinch it in any way around the waist, that should work fine. I think this could work. So I cast on, and I have been knitting and I have been knitting, and I'm almost at the end of the lace section up at the top. So the lace yoke section runs all the way from the collar, which is knit in, which was another, I will confess, another lure of this pattern. I really couldn't be fucked to think about, you know, kind of how many stitches do I cast on, how wide do I want the neckband, where do I want the neckband to sit. I just wanted to cast on with wild abandon and roll with it for a bit, and so that is what I did. So I have, let me hold it so you can actually see it properly. I have cast on at the top here. I used the alternating cable cast on, which I've talked about at length in the past. It is my cast on of choice for rib. I really like it and how it looks. And then I have knit the, I think I am on the second last or the final repeat of the lace, so it's kind of hard to show you because it is still on quite a tiny needle. I'm currently using this as my commute knitting at the moment, which sounds, you know, risky on the basis that it's lace and bobbles, but actually it's been surprisingly alright to knit on my commute. So let me see if I can hold it and you can see it. There we go. So you can see that there are these sections where you have the bubbles in the centre. There are sections where you have more of the sort of lace fanning out. I will show it off a little bit better when it is on a slightly larger needle next time round, I'm sure. But yeah, I've really enjoyed working this up. This is, in terms of the yarn, vintage stash. Oh yes. So to any or all of those doubters out there who are like, Caroline, really? You have all of this beautiful yarn behind you, you never fucking use it. Well, I say to you, Rowan felted tweed, bought in 2011. Oh yeah. Yeah, vintage stash for the win. I'm genuinely both impressed and mildly concerned with how long I've had this yarn, because I have not been knitting for much longer than that. But yeah, I bought this yarn from John Lewis, God, as I say, years ago, literally years ago, 8 years ago, where I bought this from a sale that they were having, and I bought a huge number of skeins of it, balls of it. I think I got somewhere in the region of about 12, 13 balls of this in my stash. And when I decided that I wanted to cast this on, I was looking around for a yarn that was appropriate. I wanted something that was a little bit tweedy. I wanted something that was quite neutral. The other contender in my stash is actually just over here. It is the Kingston, the Jill Draper Make Stuff Kingston that I brought back from Rhinebeck in that amazing red tweed. I'm not ruling out the fact that I may end up knitting another one of these. I know, I'm already committing to knitting another one and I haven't even finished this. Foolhardy at best, but I'm really enjoying working this up. It's got bubbles and I'm still enjoying it. Bubbles, whatever you want to call them, nups, neps, any nips if you really want. Use the terminology of your choice, but yeah, I'm even enjoying knitting up those little fuckers, and I will say that I've knit them into shawls in the past and hated every second of it, but in here, kind of loving it. It's a bit body snatchers for me. It's gone a bit crazy, but yeah, I'm really enjoying working this up. So after I finish off the lace section, you know, I'm sure it'll slow me down slightly on the basis that it then moves into being, it is reverse stockinette, but I believe from having read ahead a little bit in the pattern that you actually knit it inside out, so I will just be knitting in the round, which is fine. And then the same for the sleeves, and there's no picking up of the collar because the collar's already knit in, so essentially from there on out it should be done. But I'm kind of loving working on this. So in terms of needles and all that good stuff, so these are 3.75mm needles, so it's a US size 5 I believe. Let me just double check. The pattern itself calls for a 4mm needle, but I know that having worked with Rowan felted tweed before, this bugger grows when it has been blocked, and so I wanted to make sure that the lace section didn't grow too aggressively. The last thing I want is for this to be, you know, see-through in places. Obviously the lace will open out a little bit, it'll sit nicely over my shoulders, I'm anticipating this, but I will say that there's quite a lot of positive ease that I've seen built into some of the different versions of this, and I wanted something that was a tiny bit more fitted, so I've gone down a needle size. Time will tell us if that pays out or not, but certainly I'm pretty happy with the way that it's looking so far, and given that come a certain point I'm going to be knitting it in reverse stockinette anyway, you know, it should be fine. I intend to sort of make the fit work for me and just see how we go. I mean, this feels like famous last words, but I'm arrogantly confident about this. The colourway that I'm using is Grey Mist, and for any felted tweed aficionados you will sort of recognise that as being one that is one of their core colours. It has these little flecks of both kind of dark brown and even some light blue in there as well, so it's a really, really pretty tweedy yarn. And yeah, I'm knitting the size 44, which gives me 0 ease, which again, my thinking is that this is going to grow and I don't want it to grow too significantly. I don't necessarily want it to be hugely stretched over my bosoms, but at the same time, bosoms, who says that? Over my boobs. But yeah, at the same time, I don't want it to be too oversized, so playing it a little bit by ear, but let's see how we get on. And so that's pretty much it for this sweater. Hopefully I will be a little bit further on with this. I'll have put it onto a slightly larger needle and had a chance to try it on and see if a couple of my quick fire decision making practices have been borne out or not, and I will give you an update on the next podcast. And that's it for my actual knitting. I do need to cast on a baby knit. My boss at work is going to be heading off on maternity leave in a couple of weeks' time, and so I want to make sure that I have been able to knit something up for her little baby. I do have a couple of patterns that I tend to gravitate towards for baby knits. I happen to know that she is having a little girl, and for all that she is not particularly sort of into you know, gender specific colours, I think I'm going to go with something fairly neutral. The pattern that I have in mind is the Mignon cardigan, and it is a pattern by Loop London. It's a really pretty little A-line cardigan that works really, really well for babies aged sort of roughly 3 to 6 months-ish, potentially even younger. It has just a single button here at the neck at the front, and then it's just a little A-line with some beautiful little cabling details on the sleeves. I'll put it here on the screen so you can see what I'm talking about, but it's a very cute little knit, and it's something that can be done reasonably quickly. It takes 1 skein of DK weight yarn. I mean, heaven knows where I'll find one of those, right? I mean, chance is a fine thing. But yeah, it knits up pretty quickly, so I will endeavour to, if I don't still have it, I will endeavour to get that up and off the needles and show a picture of it for next time, assuming I actually get my arse into gear and do the old knitting. But moving along now into vicarious knitting, and only a couple of bits to update you on this time round. So, I mean, really my baby knit should have been in this section as far as vicarious knitting goes, although I do intend to make that one actual sooner rather than later. So for me, vicarious knitting in the last few weeks has been mostly based around kind of getting Whitehorse up and on the needles. But that being said, there are a couple of other patterns that have crossed my radar. However, just before we get onto patterns, I do have one very exciting thing to share with you all. So on the previous episode of the podcast, I spoke at length about a parcel that had arrived from a wonderful friend of mine who is Stacey Elstone of Stress Knits, and oh, it got me a little bit choked up and emotional for very understandable reasons, I think you'll agree. And thank you so much to everyone that reached out and said that they had a similar feeling when I was talking it through, because there's something about you know, making connections, making friendships, and sharing those friendships from all parts of the world, across ponds and digital divides and all this fun stuff, that makes this community such a fabulous part of just everything that I get to do, and that's just genuinely wonderful. And what I have to share with you this time round is just building on that once more. Now, I have been doing the podcast now for maybe 7 months. I started it back in October, and I'm incredibly grateful to everyone that has stuck around with me for that length of time. I'm incredibly grateful to anyone who's watched any episode ever. And so whether this is your first, whether this is, you know, the 21st episode that you've watched, and whether you've watched all the others in between, I'm incredibly grateful to you for doing that. It's given me a fantastic opportunity to meet with some new people, to sort of get some new friends, designers, yarn dyers onto my radar. And one of those, who also happens to be a podcaster, is Laura, who is also Tiny Human Knits on Instagram, and that is also her yarn dyeing business. I first caught sight of Laura's podcast towards the end of last year. She is based over in Canada. She is a hilarious human being. She has a wonderful podcast, and already on the basis of that and nothing else, is absolutely someone that you should go and check out. Laura came back onto my radar a couple of weeks ago now, because she posted something up on Instagram, and it was overnight for me here in the UK, so I didn't see it until sort of later on the following morning. But Laura is the most incredibly talented hand dyer, and she dyes up, amongst other things, self-striping sock yarn. And her self-striping yarn is an absolute work of genius, and anyone who dyes any yarn, I'm in absolute admiration of you. Self-striping yarn takes commitment. So those of you who've seen it, who know how it's done, who perhaps are yarn dyers yourselves, you know that it takes a huge amount of time and effort to warp up the boards, to get the spaces right so that you can dye the self-striping yarn accordingly and have it turn out in the way that you want it to. And so already my admiration for her is pretty skyrocketing high. Laura posted on Instagram about having been sitting enjoying, as she put it, an adult beverage one evening, watching a previous episode of Knitting Vicariously, and being kind of transfixed and a little bit inspired by the stash wall behind me, to the extent that she felt compelled to go away and kind of recreate this in a self-striping colourway. And the ridiculous grin that is on my face right now is pretty accurate for how I felt and what I looked like when I woke up the following morning and found this post on my phone. Because the notion that, one, people in the real world outside this room with this camera in it actually watch it makes me giddy already. The fact that someone's watching it with an adult beverage, not gonna lie, makes me even happier. The fact that someone is watching this and felt so compelled to want to go and kind of, you know, use it as a means of, you know, kind of helping them, inspire them, do things that they already do to an incredibly high standard, genuinely mind-blowing. And so to see Laura take inspiration from that and go off and to dye up a colourway that is frankly beyond anything I could have dreamt is ultimately kind of overwhelming and pretty touching, to say the least. And already I was blown away by that. She called it the dunderknit rainbow. Yep. We all know what happens when people do things like that. I cry. That's what happens when people do things like that. So that happened. And then and then she started posting pictures of the socks that she was working up. And I am going to steal a picture. I'm going to put it up here on the screen so that you can see it, because the socks are incredible and the colours are incredible. And yes, she's used gold as the heels, toes and cuffs. And yes, she has. Damn right. And honestly, seeing these was making me so giddy. And then Laura put some pre-orders up in her shop, and to those of you who've got the skeins already, to those of you who've been posting about them over on Instagram, who love them, I'm so pleased that you love them. I'm so pleased that you've got an opportunity to support Laura and her incredible business and endeavours, because I couldn't be happier with any of this. And just when I thought I couldn't be happier with any of this, Laura sent me some skeins. And so here is the dunderknit rainbow alongside the dunderknit rainbow. I mean, yeah, seriously, I've got nothing. I've got absolutely nothing. Let me just hold this up and you can appreciate it. I mean, it's basically camouflage right now on the basis that I'm holding something that is up, something that is inspired by what's behind it, up in front of it. So yeah, this is Laura's yarn company is Tiny Human Knits. It is on her fabulous 80/20 merino nylon base. You can see all of the colours that are in this rainbow. And honestly, I don't even know where to start. It's incredible. It's incredible. And, oh, Laura, nah. Like, I hope you're getting a sample of how much joy this has brought me, because I can't. I did also cry in a coffee shop when I opened this. I need to learn my fucking lesson, people, which is don't open post from people in public places, because then I'll cry and people around me will think I'm having some sort of episode. And just, yeah, but it's worth it. I don't even care. So yeah, she sent a skein of the dunderknit rainbow. She also sent a skein of the pastel dunderknit rainbow, which is another version of the colourway. So this is her pastel version, which is just slightly sort of chilled out hues of the similar colours. It's also on her 80/20 base, and I love this to bits as well. It is just, I can't. So these together, amazing. Amazing. Thank you, Laura. Thank you so, so much. I'm just genuinely speechless. Now, I know that Laura has had a pre-order for these. That pre-order has now come and gone. I also know that, you know, to paraphrase what she said before, they're kind of an arse to die, which is, again, so typical of me. In the sense that, yeah, kind of a pain in the arse. I get it, it's fine. So I know that perhaps for the next couple of weeks they're not necessarily going to be up in her shop. I also know that in terms of updates she is pacing herself a little bit. So I do believe that they will be up at some point later on in the year, but for no other reason than the fact that she is hugely fucking talented. Please do go and give her a follow over on Instagram. She is, as I mentioned, Tiny Human Knits, and that way, if and when these do come back into her shop, you will be one of the first to know. But in the meantime, in addition to including a skein for me, Laura also included an extra skein for me to do whatever I choose with. And so I don't normally do giveaways here on the podcast. I know that we've just had the UIF giveaway, we've had the Vicarious Rhinebecken giveaway, and we've had the prizes that I've done for the Blame Dunder Knit Along, but I don't generally do sort of ad hoc giveaways as and when. I'm going to make an exception this time round because, one, this is a yarn that is ridiculously close to my heart, and two, because her pre-orders did sell out fairly quickly. I know there were a few people who were disappointed. I want an opportunity to share this with other people who are also enjoying the beauty of the stash wall behind me as a means of bringing it to you vicariously, if you will. So I am going to be creating a new thread over in the Ravelry group. There will be a prompt in there, and I think the prompt is going to have to have something to do with rainbows and stash rainbows and somewhere over the stash bow, and right, that's what it's going to be called, somewhere over the stash bow. Look out for that over on Ravelry, enter in the prompt, and I will close that ahead of the podcast next time. Somewhere over the stash bow, that makes me so happy. But yes, thank you, Laura. Just beyond words. I'm speechless. Thank you so much. But yes, otherwise in Vicarious Knitting, I'm going to share a couple of patterns that have caught my eye in the last few weeks. The first of those should come as very little surprise to those of you who've been around and watching this for a while now. Finally, after months and months and the best part of a year of really just press ganging a designer into doing this, and I kind of feel ashamed but also kind of vindicated. The Shifted sweater by Justyna Larkowska, who also designed this cardigan, albeit it is not entirely my style, but the designs themselves are beautiful and incredibly well written. Justyna Larkowska, who is Letty's Knits over on Instagram and on Ravelry, has released the Shifted pullover. The Shifted pullover, which you'll see on the screen here, is a drop shoulder version of her shifting sweater. That is harder to say than I was expecting, and it is a beautiful, beautiful design. It's one that she promoted first over on Instagram about a year ago now. I commented a few times and made my interests and my intentions known. She announced a test knit for it a couple of months back now. I got to squish the original sample back at UIF and was delighted about it. That pattern has now been released, and you can bet your bottom dollar that I will be knitting it in the not too distant future. So yes, delighted to see that that has now been published. My wonderful friend Claire, who is Transient Meow over on Instagram and on Ravelry, was one of the test knitters. She looks stunningly beautiful in her version. I mean, Claire looks stunningly beautiful in all of the versions of all of the sweaters she's knit ever, but this one is particularly close to my heart. So yes, delighted to see that having been published, and looking forward to having that on the needles very soon. In terms of other bits of Vicarious knitting, I have been having a look through our Vicarious knitting and indeed our actual knitting threads over on Ravelry. One of the sweaters that jumped out is, funnily enough, it is a sweater that I've mentioned in previous weeks, but it's a sweater I mentioned in previous weeks kind of saying, yeah, I'm not really sure about this sweater. And all it takes, and this is absolute proof of that, is to see someone else who's knit it in a slightly different way for you to look at it in a very different light. Now, the Wool and Honey sweater by Andrea Mowry is not, you know, kind of a niche project, shall we say. A lot of people have knit this sweater, and I will confess, it's not been high on my list of things I wanted to make. I'm pretty sure I said that in the last episode, but all it took was to see the version that Wronghand Mads has knit over on Ravelry. She posted it in the Ravelry group, and her version is absolutely beautiful. Now again, it's a beautiful pattern, right? This shouldn't come as any surprise to anyone, but there is something about Wronghand Mad's pattern, or her version rather, that just made me kind of stop and really reconsider. And I think part of that is to do with the ease. So it is a very kind of positive ease, oversized sweater. She has knit it at a slightly smaller, not a smaller gauge, but certainly with less ease in it for her. And the fact that it's slightly more fitted, the fact that it is a little bit more, I want to say sort of, it's not boxy because that suggests it is oversized, but it's certainly very kind of straight fit as opposed to it being oversized, if that makes sense. And also the fact that she's knit it in this beautiful burgundy colour. It's really beautiful. So yeah, that definitely gave me pause for thought. So thank you very, very much for posting that one. It's making me reconsider some options around that. On the subject of burgundy sweaters, another sweater that caught my eye is this stunner, and again I'll put it on here on the screen. This is a sweater by Hazy Summers, and this is her Rusty Tuku pattern by Susanna Sommer, and it's a really beautiful sweater. Again, burgundy. Clearly I'm having a bit of a thing for that at the moment, but I really love the way that it's got these fabulous kind of stripes of colourwork built into the yoke itself. It's a very, very unusual pattern, and again, scrolling through that, it caught my eye. It's knit out of Rauma PT2, which is a yarn that I've used for colour work in the past, and so I can imagine that being really kind of big and cozy as a jumper. But yeah, I just really like this. It's definitely unusual. I was looking at the time, as I say, for the kind of the slightly more kind of textured or bolder kind of patterns in and around the yoke area, and so this definitely caught my eye there. But your version in particular was really, really stunning, so thank you very much for sharing that one too. Another pattern that has cropped up over on the Share Your Vicarious Knits thread this month has been a pattern that I've seen before and have really seriously contemplated working up, so it definitely brought it back front of mind. And it's a cardigan, but it's a cardigan that, unlike this, is probably a little bit more my style. This is a pattern that was mentioned by Deep Blue Renegade over on Ravelry, and it is the Swift River cardigan, and it's a pattern by Mary Annarella. Mary is a wonderful, wonderful designer. She is someone who I've had the pleasure of meeting twice now, both when she came to EYF last year and then again at Rhinebeck. She is a very talented designer with a vast number of beautiful garments in particular, and this Swift River cardigan is no exception. It's a fabulous long line sort of, I'd call it long line rather than oversized cardigan, with beautiful garter stitch texture down the front. It has pockets that are built in, because pockets, we all love a pocket, and it's just a really stunningly timeless design. And it helps that Mary's sample, the original sample, is knit in the most beautiful eye-popping teal colour. It's really, really just exceptionally pretty. But yes, so that brought that one front of mind there as well. And I do love a slouchy cardigan, so that might be one to think about as well. So thank you very much for mentioning that as well, Deep Blue Renegade. But it's not all garment chat over there. No, indeed. There was quite a bit of discussion from a few folks around a shawl pattern called Butterfly/Papillon by Marin Melchior, and this is a beautiful shawl pattern. I'll put a picture of it up here on the screen so you know what I'm talking about, but I've seen quite a few versions of this around. It was very popular at EYF from what I understand as well, and it certainly lends itself to being something that can be incredibly colourful or indeed incredibly classic, depending on your personal aesthetic, or both. Go crazy. But yeah, it's a really beautiful shawl, and so I can see that working up incredibly nicely with perhaps some leftovers, perhaps some gradient yarn. Some of the examples that I've seen of it are absolutely stunning, and so if you're in the market for a shawl and you fancy being a little bit creative with some of your colour choices, I think you'd do a great option with that pattern there. Or alternatively, if you're in the market for a shawl but you want something that is perhaps a little bit less intense in terms of all the different kind of sections to work through, there is also the Monument shawl by Kyle Vey, and this is another beautiful, beautiful example. It's got some gorgeous texture in there, it's got a fantastic use of colour. You could put in a few different skeins and a few different choices, but for me the texture of this is an absolute winner. And I do love a DK weight shawl. I have a couple already. They're the ones that I gravitate towards wearing the most often, and so for me this could be a real contender a little bit later in the year. It is really, really I wouldn't even call it simple, because it's very kind of structured and it's quite classic. Let's go with that. I can see it being incredibly unisex. It's not particularly kind of feminine in that sense. You could make it and adapt it depending on your own colour choices, and really, really make it your own. Another stunning choice, and so thank you very much to Harry Hobbit who mentioned that one, who is a new viewer, and so hello and welcome to you. And so there we have it. As I mentioned, if you're on the lookout for inspiration, you would do much, much worse than to go and to check out some of the threads that we've got over in the Knitting Vicariously Ravelry group. If you're not a member already, please do feel free to come and join us over there. It very much is where a lot of the chat is at in the interim weeks when I'm not podcasting. So yeah, by all means come and join us there. But that is pretty much it for this episode, so I will be back in a couple of weeks' time to give you a little bit of an update on all things knitty and my side of the world. But in the meantime, as ever, you will be able to find us over in the Ravelry group, as I've already mentioned. You can find that by searching for Knitting Vicariously in the groups tab on Ravelry. You can also find us over on Instagram, and whether you choose to follow me or whether you choose to follow the Knitting Vicariously podcast account, you can also hashtag any applicable images, posts, anything that you want to with the hashtag Knitting Vicariously, just to bring it all under one digital roof, so to speak. And I don't always remember to say this, but thank you as ever so much to everybody who has subscribed, who comments over on YouTube. I know that I had a little bit of a moment earlier on this week because I was checking in on kind of some of the comments that I'd had for the first time, and it's been a while since I really clocked where we're at in terms of subscribers. I think the last time I've mentioned it here on the podcast, we were somewhere around about the 6,000 mark. We're now closer to 9,200, and the thought of that blows my tiny mind. And to every single one of you who've subscribed, or to anyone that just happens to watch the podcast on a regular basis, I'm so incredibly grateful to you for doing it. I really do appreciate it. You make coming back here on a regular basis incredibly fun, and the fact that I've had an opportunity to meet some of you in real life, and will have an opportunity to meet more of you in the coming weeks, months, years, makes me very happy indeed. And so thank you very, very much. I really do appreciate it. But all that being said, I wish you a wonderful rest of day, rest of week. I hope your knitting is keeping you happy and fulfilled. And if for whatever reason it doesn't, then I hope you have a reason and an opportunity to knit vicariously. Keep on keeping on, and I will see you again next time. Bye. But you know, it's all good. I am working my way through yeah, I'm doing that. It is hard to believe it, but we are edging into May, and that means that a quarter of the year, no, a third of the year, maths. It's hard to believe it, but we are edging into May, and that means that a third of the year. I've already said it once and I still get it wrong. That is how bad my maths is. Fucking hell. Right. Whew. Hard to believe it as it may. No, those are. Now it's my English that's affected, because that wasn't a sentence. That wasn't even close to being a sentence. Oh, Jesus. It's difficult to believe, but it's also difficult to pronounce. Oh, I think we're going to have plenty of fodder for the bloopers section this week. Good. I mean, being back on the gin probably doesn't help, but yeah, it's fine. Coping mechanisms. Coping with my own stupidity. And then a couple of other people mentioned Shamshor. I've gone full Sean Connery here. They mentioned Shamshor. That wasn't even Sean. What the hell? Oh God. Right, back to the gin.